The last straw. The message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, October 2nd, sandwiched between two work emails and a notification from her bank. Sarah Bennett had been sitting at her desk, staring at the quarterly reports she was supposed to be reviewing, when her phone buzzed. She almost didn't look at it. Almost. Mom, BTY, you're not invited to Thanksgiving this year. You're not family anymore if you can't be respectful. Idiot. Sarah read the message 3 times. Each reading felt like a separate punch, each one landing differently. First shock, then recognition, then something else. Something that had been building for 28 years, waiting for this exact moment to crystallize. She wasn't surprised. She'd known for years that her relationship with her mother was fractured, had accepted the hairline cracks in which should have been an unbreakable bond. But this casual cruelty, this dismissal wrapped in casual profanity, felt different. It felt like the moment where something that had been slowly suffocating finally stopped pretending to breathe. She set the phone down on her desk and stared at the blank wall of her cubicle. Around her, the office hummed with familiar sounds, the printer jamming on the 3rd floor, Rebecca from accounting laughing too loudly at something on her computer, the soft click-click-click of mechanical keyboards. Normal life. Her normal life, which had never really felt normal, because it was always divided between what she built for herself and what she funded for others. The decision didn't come as a bolt of lightning. It came as a quiet certainty, the kind that settles into your bones and makes you feel more solid than you'd felt in years. She opened her banking app. Sarah's financial entanglement with her family had started small, the way most emotional debts do. She was 23 when her father lost his job at the manufacturing plant in Parkersburg. It was supposed to be temporary help, just a few months of mortgage assistance while he found something new. He never did find something comparable. By 25, Sarah was paying half the mortgage. By 27, she was paying for the utilities, the car insurance for both her parents, and her younger brother Michael's community college tuition. By 28, she was funding a lifestyle that had nothing to do with her own. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus, drove a 7-year-old Honda with 120,000 miles on the odometer, and brought her lunch in a recycled plastic container. Her parents lived in a 4-bedroom house with a deck and a hot tub. Her mother, Patricia, had stopped working 5 years ago, claiming chronic fatigue. Her father, Robert, had become something between unemployed and permanently exhausted. Michael, now 24, cycled through jobs and apartments like they were seasonal trends. And Sarah paid. Always Sarah. She'd never resented it, not really. Or at least she'd become very good at not examining the resentment too closely. This was what family did. This was love. The kind that had no price tag because it paid itself in small increments over years until you forgot you were spending anything at all. But that message on Tuesday changed something. It rewired the circuit. That evening, after leaving work early, citing a migraine that wasn't entirely false, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a glass of wine and her laptop open to her banking interface. She scrolled through months of payments with the methodical precision of an auditor. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. The mortgage payment, $850. The electric bill, $180. Water and sewage, $95. Car insurance for her parents' sedan, $120. Internet and phone for the house, $110. Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, HBO Max, $62. A small personal loan she'd taken out when her mother needed dental work, $250 a month. Miscellaneous emergencies she funded through Venmo to her brother, averaging $400 a month. It came to $2,067 every single month, $24,804 every single year. Sarah poured more wine and made a list of everything her family would lose if she stopped paying. She spent Wednesday and Thursday in a state of peculiar calm. She didn't respond to her mother's message. She didn't call anyone. She went to work, sat through meetings where she contributed nothing memorable, and came home to her small apartment where she existed in the space between her old life and whatever came next. Her mother tried on Wednesday. "Call me, we need to talk about Thanksgiving." She didn't call. Her brother Michael texted Thursday morning. "Mom's being dramatic about something. You good?" Sarah didn't respond. Her father sent an email Thursday afternoon.
Her father, who barely used email, who usually let her mother do the communicating. Your mother is upset. Please call her. Sarah opened the email, read it, and felt something crystallized further into place. She thought about her father's face when she'd helped him fill out unemployment paperwork, the shame that had lived there, the way it had aged him 10 years and 1 month. She thought about how, instead of fighting to rebuild, he'd settled into the role of the fallen man, letting his wife and daughter carry him forward. She didn't respond to the email either. Friday morning, Sarah made the calls. Not to her family, not yet. First to her bank. She opened a new savings account and had her direct deposit split 70% to this new account, 30% to her checking. Then she called the mortgage company and removed herself as a co-payer on her parents' loan, citing her desire to improve her own credit profile. They seemed almost relieved. Apparently, the account had been flagged for review. Then came the utilities company, where she explained that she would no longer be responsible for payments and that the accounts should be transferred to the primary resident, Robert Bennett. The customer service representative asked if her father could come to the phone. Sarah said he couldn't. She switched the streaming services to her own separate profile and set a reminder to cancel them tomorrow. She called the car insurance company and made an appointment to have her parents removed from her policy, effective immediately. They could find their own insurance. Each call felt like a small brick being removed from a dam she'd built without realizing it. Each one was terrifying. Each one was necessary. She didn't do it out of revenge. She needed to be clear about that even in the privacy of her own thoughts. This wasn't punishment. This was triage. This was recognizing that she'd been slowly drowning while tossing life jackets to people who weren't even trying to swim.
That evening, she sent an email to her mother, her father, and her brother. She copied all three in one message, which was perhaps a small cruelty, but also efficient. I've made some changes to my finances. Effective immediately, I'm no longer able to fund family expenses. This includes the mortgage, utilities, insurance, subscriptions, and any personal loans. These changes are effective October 7th. You'll need to make arrangements to cover these expenses yourselves. I'm happy to discuss this, but I'm not available for conversation about whether this is fair or reasonable. It's done. I'm not angry. I'm protecting myself. Sarah. She hit send at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday night, and then she turned off her phone. Part 2. The fracture. The call started Saturday morning before 8 a.m. Sarah had known they would. She'd braced for it in an abstract way. The way you brace for pain you know is coming, but can't quite prepare for. Anyway, she looked at the phone screen, Mom, and let it go to voicemail. She got up, made coffee, sat by her kitchen window, and waited for the next one. It came at 8:16, then 8:31. By noon, there had been 12 calls. She counted them in the notification list, the missed call notifications stacking up like evidence of something she couldn't quite name. The voicemail were the worst. She made the mistake of listening to them while eating a sandwich. Sarah, this is completely insane. Call me back immediately. We need to talk about this nonsense. Her mother, voice tight with the particular fury of someone used to getting what she wanted. Hey, sis, I'm confused. Is this a joke? Dad's freaking out. Call me. Michael, genuinely bewildered, which somehow made it worse. Sarah, please don't do this. Your mother is very upset. We can talk about it, please. Her father, defeated before the conversation had even started. By 2 p.m., she had 17 missed calls and 9 text messages. They were escalating in a pattern she could predict. First came confusion. What is happening? Then came anger. This is cruel and you know it. Then came panic. The mortgage is due in 10 days. What are we supposed to do? Then came manipulation. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Sarah read this last message while sitting on her couch, and something in her went very quiet. After everything they'd done for her. The message sat in the middle of her screen, glowing with a kind of terrible irony. Her parents had done things for her. Yes, they'd fed and clothed her as a child. They'd sent her to college, mostly through loans that she'd repaid herself because they couldn't afford the full amount. They'd been present at her 18th birthday party,
though they'd both seemed stressed the entire time. They'd loved her, probably, in whatever way people love their children when they're still figuring out how to love themselves. But they had also demanded. They had expected. They had assumed that her life, once she could make money, would automatically extend to fund theirs. They had never asked if this was something she wanted or could sustain. They'd simply assumed the world owed them a life with hot tubs and streaming services and the luxury of not working, and that Sarah owed them that world specifically. At 3:47 p.m., her mother called again. This time, Sarah answered. "Sarah?" Her mother's voice was a knife wrapped in tissue paper, soft but dangerous. "What in God's name were you thinking?" Sarah sat in the quiet of her apartment and took a breath that felt like the first real breath she'd taken in days. "Hi, Mom." "Don't hi, Mom me. This is unhinged. Do you have any idea what's going to happen when that mortgage payment doesn't clear? Do you understand what you're doing?" "I do," Sarah said. She was surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "I understand exactly what I'm doing. I'm asking you to be responsible for your own bills. You can't just—" Her mother made a sound of frustrated breath. "You can't just stop. You have a responsibility to this family." "I had a responsibility to this family," Sarah said. The words felt important. The distinction felt crucial. "I fulfilled that responsibility for years, but at some point, I have to be responsible for myself. This is insane. Your brother needs his tuition paid. Your father is looking for work. We need—" "I know what you need," Sarah interrupted. And she did know. She'd been keeping a careful mental tally for years. "But my answer is no. I can't do this anymore." "Can't or won't?" Her mother's voice shifted into a register Sarah had heard before, the one reserved for maximum damage. "It sounds like won't. It sounds like you're selfish. It sounds like you've become exactly the kind of person I was afraid you'd become. Ungrateful, cold." Sarah felt the words land, felt them the way a person feels an old injury flare in cold weather, a sharp, familiar pain. But underneath the pain was something else. Underneath it was the knowledge that these words had been designed to hurt her specifically, calibrated over years, that they'd worked for years, that she didn't have to let them work anymore. "Maybe," Sarah said, "but I'm also staying alive. I'm also taking care of myself for the first time in 8 years. And Mom, I have to tell you, your message on Tuesday calling me an idiot, disinviting me from Thanksgiving, that wasn't about boundaries. That was about punishment because I wasn't doing what you wanted. Your tone. I'm not finishing this conversation by apologizing or defending myself," Sarah said. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "I'm calling to tell you that the bills are going to start bouncing next week. You have 7 days to contact those companies and take over the payments. I hope you figure it out." "Sarah!" She hung up. The silence that followed was profound. She sat in it for 10 minutes, maybe longer, and waited for panic. She waited for regret. She waited for the familiar guilt that usually followed any conflict with her family. It didn't come. What came instead was a profound exhaustion, as if she'd been holding her breath for 8 years and could finally exhale. Part 3, the barrage. The calls didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. 87 missed calls by Sunday evening. Sarah didn't keep track formally, but she watched the notification counter tick higher with a strange kind of detachment, the way one might watch a storm roll in, not with hope or dread, but with the simple knowledge that weather would do what weather does. Her brother called 16 times on Sunday alone. His voicemails progressed from confused to panicked to furious with impressive speed. "Dude, what are you doing? Dad's having a meltdown. Mom's crying. This is insane. Sarah, I'm not joking. We need to talk. This is serious." "You know what? Fine. Screw you too. I guess I'm done with college. I guess that's your solution to all of this." Her father called 6 times. He never left voicemails. Her mother called the most, 43 times by Sunday evening, according to the notification center. Her messages ranged across an impressive spectrum of emotional manipulation. Guilt. Do you know how ashamed I am to tell people in my book club that my daughter abandoned me? Desperation. Please, Sarah, we're scared. Help us figure this out. Accusation. You've always been selfish. Even as a child, you wanted everything for yourself. Threat. If you don't call me back by tonight, I'm done. You'll have no mother. Sarah didn't respond to any of them. She'd taken Monday off work and called her HR department to let them know she might need to adjust her schedule temporarily, that she was dealing with something personal. They were understanding in the way large corporations are understanding, essentially indifferent but polite about it. On Monday evening, her best friend Jennifer texted, "Why is your mom calling me asking if I've seen you or if you're okay? What happened?" Sarah called Jennifer and spent an hour explaining the entire situation. It took that long because Sarah kept getting interrupted by more incoming calls. She counted them while she talked. Her mother called 7 times during that 1 hour, 12 times if you counted her father. "Jesus," said Jennifer when Sarah finished. "Are you okay?" Sarah considered the question. Was she okay? She was terrified. She was also lighter than she'd felt in years. She was grieving and relieved in equal measure, the way you might feel if you learned that the chronic pain you'd been carrying was finally gone, but only because the arm had fallen off. "I think so," Sarah said. "I don't know yet. Do you want to stay at my place for a few days?" "No," Sarah said, and meant it. "I think I need to sit with this, but thank you." Tuesday morning, a bouquet of flowers arrived at her door. They were expensive, professionally arranged, and accompanied by a card that read, "I'm sorry for the Thanksgiving comment. Let's talk. Mom." Sarah looked at the flowers for a long moment, then she put them in the trash. Not out of anger, but out of recognition. This was a different kind of manipulation, the kind that came wrapped in apology but wasn't actually asking for forgiveness. It was asking for capitulation. It was asking her to absorb the hurt and accept a surface-level bandage over a systemic problem. The flowers in the trash were still receiving phone calls, essentially. By Wednesday, the panic on the family's end had escalated into crisis management. Michael called Sarah's workplace and asked to speak to her. When she got the message from a confused receptionist, she felt a spike of something cold in her chest. Her brother had crossed a line, not a legal one, but a boundary, the kind that said he was becoming desperate enough to find her, even when she didn't want to be found. She called him back. "Jesus, thank God," Michael said immediately. "I've been trying to reach you for days." "I know. I've been screening my calls. The mortgage company just called Dad. The payment bounced. They're talking about late fees, potential foreclosure if it keeps bouncing. Sarah, do you understand what you've done?" Sarah did understand. She understood it very clearly. She'd set a boundary, and now everyone was experiencing the consequences of that boundary being a real thing. "Michael, I gave you all a week to figure it out. It's now the 7th day. That's not an accident or a surprise. We can't just—" He made a sound of frustrated exhale. "We can't just come up with $850 in 7 days. Mom doesn't work. Dad's been looking but can't find anything. I'm making $14 an hour at the grocery store. Do the math." I did the math. I did that math for 8 years. That's why I stopped. "So what? What's the plan? We lose the house? Dad gets evicted? Is that justice or something?" I don't want anyone evicted. And it was true. She didn't want that. But she also recognized that wanting it to be different and being responsible for solving it were 2 different things. "But, Michael, they have resources you're not thinking about. Mom could go back to work. Dad could take any job, not just look for something perfect. You could move into an apartment with roommates. These aren't the only options. Easy to say when you're not the one losing your house." "Yep," Sarah said. "It is easy to say. That's kind of the point. It was hard for me to make the decision, but I'm not going to make it hard for me anymore to make it easy for everyone else." Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then, "So that's it? You're just done?" "I'm done paying. I'm not done being your sister. but I'm done being the financial solution to your family's refusal to take responsibility. The line went dead. Michael had hung up. Part 4. The truth. By Thursday of that week, something strange happened. The calls slowed, not stopped. Patricia still called twice a day, like clockwork, at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m., as if those were her allotted times for trying to resurrect the old arrangement. But the frantic energy was gone. The desperation had transmuted into something colder. Determination, maybe. Or resignation. Sarah went to work on Thursday and found herself able to focus. She had coffee at her desk. She attended a meeting where she actually contributed ideas. She called a client back without her hands shaking. It was remarkable how much capacity opened up when you stopped carrying other people's crises. On Friday morning, a letter arrived. Actual mail in an envelope, handwritten by her mother. Sarah made fresh coffee before opening it. She sat at her kitchen table and slid the pages out carefully. 3 pages, written in her mother's neat, careful handwriting. Sarah, I know you won't take my calls. I know you're angry with me. I was too harsh about Thanksgiving and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to understand what you've done and why it's wrong. Your father and I sacrificed for you. We raised you. We put you through school. We gave you a stable home, and this is how you repay us? By abandoning us in our time of need? Your brother is devastated. He feels betrayed by you, and he has every right to. You promised him he could finish college. You told him you'd help. Now you're breaking that promise and acting like it's our fault for needing help. I've talked to several people, and they all agree that what you're doing is morally wrong. Margaret from my book club said her daughter did something similar, and she doesn't speak to her anymore. Is that what you want? Do you want to be that kind of person? If you want your family back, you know what you need to do. Pay the bills and apologize. Till then, I can't support this behavior. You've made your choice. Now live with it. Sarah read the letter 3 times, and something interesting happened. She recognized it all. The reframing of financial dependence as sacrifice, the equation of money with love, the threat of permanent expulsion, the implication that her boundaries were somehow a moral failing. She'd heard these arguments before, turned over in her mind 1,000 times. But reading them on a page, in her mother's handwriting, something clicked into focus. These weren't arguments. These were manipulations. And recognizing them as such didn't make them hurt less, exactly, but it made the hurt different. The hurt became clear. It became specific. It stopped being the vague, ambient guilt that had haunted her for years and became instead a simple, finite grief. The grief of not having the relationship with her mother that she'd always wanted, that she thought might be possible someday if she just paid enough, tried enough, accommodated enough. That grief was real, but it was also survivable. Sarah put the letter in a drawer and didn't respond. Part 5. Recognition. By the second week, Sarah had settled into a new rhythm. She still got the calls. Patricia called at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. every single day, religious in her consistency. Sarah let them all go to voicemail. She didn't listen to the messages anymore. But something had shifted in the world outside her control. On Monday of the second week, her brother stopped calling. That same day, she received a text from an unknown number. The area code was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. Hi, Sarah. This is Linda from Community Financial. Your mother has contacted our office about consolidating some of the family debts. If you're a co-signer, you'll need to be involved in that conversation. Please call when you have a moment. 555-0147. Sarah read the message twice, and then she started to laugh. Not hysterical laughter, but genuine, deep laughter that surprised her with its clean, sharp edges. Her mother was doing what needed to be done. Without her. Without the threat of family breakdown doing it for her. Patricia had finally picked up the phone and started making calls. Not to Sarah to apologize or manipulate, but to other people to solve the problem. It meant the breakthrough, if you could call it that, had come from an unexpected direction, not through guilt or reconciliation, but through necessity. Her mother had been forced to face the reality that Sarah was not going to solve this problem, and in that facing, had begun to solve it herself. Sarah didn't call the financial advisor back. She didn't need to. She wasn't a co-signer on any of the debts. She'd been smarter than that in the years when she'd been less wise. But knowing that her mother was doing something, anything, was its own kind of relief. The following Thursday, exactly 2 weeks after her first email, another message arrived. This time it was from her father, an actual email, typed carefully in large font with many line breaks. Sarah, your mother is very hurt by all of this. I'm not trying to change your mind. I just wanted to tell you that we found a financial advisor to help us reorganize things. We're going to try to handle the mortgage ourselves with a different arrangement. Your brother is working 2 jobs to help us bridge the gap. It's not ideal, but we're doing it. I'm not apologizing for needing help. Sometimes people do need help, but I understand now that help isn't the same as entitlement. We won't be asking for money again. I think your mother will come to understand this too, eventually. Your mother is still very angry, but I wanted you to know that I understand what you did and why. I'm not happy about it, but I understand it. Dad. Sarah read the email 7 times. She saved it to a folder on her computer labeled important. She considered responding and decided not to. What was there to say? He had done what he needed to do, which was to move forward. Anything she said now would just be noise. Part 6. The other side. The calls from her mother finally stopped on October 28th. She knew the exact date because she marked it in her calendar with a simple check mark, like it was a symptom that had finally resolved. That evening, she sat on her balcony with a glass of wine and looked out at the city lights, and she felt something close to peace. Not happiness, exactly. Not the erasure of sadness or the disappearance of complicated feelings about her family, but peace. The specific peace of having set a boundary and held it even when holding it cost something. She'd lost something real. She'd lost the version of her mother who called to chat on Sunday mornings. She'd lost the brother who used to text her funny memes. She'd lost the version of her family that existed when she was paying for it, which is to say, she'd lost the version of her family that only existed in exchange for money. But she'd gained something too. She'd gained time. She'd gained the ability to plan her own future. She gained $2,067 a month that was now hers to spend on things like therapy, which she'd started immediately after the second week, and which was teaching her words for things she'd felt her whole life but never known how to name. She'd gained the knowledge that she was strong enough to stand alone. Thanksgiving arrived with neither an invitation nor a non-invitation from her mother. Sarah took the day off work and, after much consideration, took herself to a small restaurant downtown that served a prix-fixe menu designed specifically for people eating alone on Thanksgiving. There were 6 other solo diners there, and she'd never felt less alone in a room full of people she'd never met. The turkey was dry, the stuffing was oversalted, the pie was mediocre. It was the best meal she'd had in years. She spent the dinner actively grateful, not for food or family, but for the simple fact of existing in her own life, making her own choices, spending her own money on things that mattered to her. She thought about calling her mother just to prove some kind of paint, and then she recognized that impulse for what it was, the last ghost of the old pattern trying to resurrect itself. She didn't call. Instead, she went home and worked on her apartment. She'd been neglecting it for years, spending so much money on her family's comfort that she'd never made her own space feel like home. Now she hung pictures. She bought plants. She invested in a better mattress. She made her apartment beautiful. By December, the calls had completely stopped. Sarah checked her phone occasionally, almost reflexively, looking for messages that never came. The silence was its own form of relief and its own form of grief, living on top of each other like sedimentary rock. She received a text from her brother on December 15th. "Merry Christmas if you're celebrating. I got a 3rd job. Things are getting slightly less terrible." Sarah responded, "I'm proud of you. Merry Christmas." He didn't respond, but that was okay. The conversation didn't need to be longer than it was. She didn't receive anything from her parents for Christmas. No card, no call, no reconciliation. Part of her had hoped there might be. Not because she wanted to resume funding their lives, but because reconciliation without that condition would have meant something different. It would have meant that they'd learned what she'd been trying to teach them, which was that love and money were two separate currencies, and that demanding one in the language of the other was a kind of cruelty. But her mother had not learned this. Her mother, as of her last known contact in mid-December, was still waiting for Sarah to apologize for having boundaries. Sarah had learned to be okay with that. Part 7. The New Normal. 6 months later, in late April, Sarah sat in her therapist's office and talked about what it meant to leave family without actually leaving. "You're still grieving," Dr. Martinez said. "That's important to recognize. Boundaries aren't just about cutting people off. They're about changing a relationship. And changing a relationship means grieving the old relationship even when the old relationship was harmful." "I still think about calling them sometimes," Sarah admitted, "especially when something good happens. My boss promoted me last month, and I wanted to call and tell my mom. Not because I think she'd be happy for me. She probably wouldn't be, or she'd find some way to make it about her. But because that's what you're supposed to do, isn't it? Tell your mom about the good things?" "You could tell her," Dr. Martinez said gently. "But first, ask yourself, why do you want to? What do you want from that?" Sarah sat with that question. What did she want? She wanted her mother to be proud of her. She wanted her mother to see her as a person with her own life, her own accomplishments, her own values separate from what she could provide. She wanted her mother to apologize, not because it would fix anything, but because it would mean her mother had understood what she'd done wrong. She wanted, in short, a mother who was different than the one she had. "I don't think I can have what I want," Sarah said finally. "Then you have two choices. You can accept what you have without wanting something different, or you can let the wanting go." By August, Sarah had done both. She didn't stop missing her mother. The ache of that missing would probably never fully go away. It had been written into her from childhood, this need for maternal approval and maternal love. But she'd made space for the ache to exist without demanding to be filled. She'd let it be the price of her own freedom, and she'd decided that price was worth paying. She'd also done something else. She'd taken that $2,067 a month she'd been spending on her family's life and started investing it. Some went to therapy, some went to savings, some went to experiences, concerts, travel, the small, beautiful things that had been absent from her life when she was too busy keeping other people's lives from collapsing. In September, she went on a weekend trip to a lake house that she rented with Jennifer and 2 other friends. She watched the sunset over the water and felt something close to joy, which was different from happiness. Joy was this: the absence of weight, the absence of someone else's needs taking up space in her chest. Her brother had eventually called her in May, a surprisingly normal conversation about his new job and his plans to move into his own apartment by fall. He didn't apologize for the anger he expressed when she first cut off funding. He didn't discuss the family situation at all. And somehow that felt like its own kind of apology, its own kind of boundary being respected. They had a relationship now that was based on something other than financial obligation. It was smaller, maybe, but it was real in a way the old one hadn't been. She never heard from her mother again. Epilogue. Gratitude. On the anniversary of the day she sent that first email, 1 year to the day, Sarah sat down and wrote her mother a letter. She didn't mail it. She probably wouldn't, but she needed to write it. "Mom, a year ago today, I set a boundary that changed everything. I know you experienced it as a betrayal. I know it felt like I abandoned you. I know you still think I was wrong. But I want to tell you what I know. I was suffocating. I was disappearing into other people's needs, and I was drowning slowly enough that no one noticed I was going under. You didn't notice because you couldn't afford to. Dad didn't notice because he'd already given up. Michael didn't notice because I was still functioning, still paying, still showing up. But I noticed. I felt it every single day, the weight of other people's lives on my shoulders, the knowledge that I couldn't ever do enough, that there would always be another bill, another emergency, another need I was supposed to fulfill. You called me selfish. You said I was ungrateful. But Mom, choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. I'm not angry at you. I'm sad. I'm sad that you couldn't see me as separate from my bank account. I'm sad that my value to you was tied to what I could provide. I'm sad that when I tried to change that arrangement, You chose to cut me off instead of trying to understand. But I'm not sorry. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the space to build my own life. I'm grateful for the lessons that didn't come from you but from myself. I'm grateful for the peace I've found in accepting that I cannot control whether you love me, whether you miss me, whether you ever understand why I did what I did. I can only control what I do next. I hope you're okay. I hope you found a way to make it work. And I hope someday you understand that what I did was an act of love, not for you, but for me. And that loving myself doesn't diminish what I feel for you. It just means I've finally learned that love shouldn't feel like drowning. Goodbye, Mom. Sarah. She read the letter once, then she tore it into small pieces and let them fall into the recycling bin. The act of writing it was enough. The act of saying it, even if only to herself, was enough. That evening, she made dinner for herself in her small apartment, the apartment that finally felt like a home. She lit candles and put on music and set a single place at her table. And as she sat there, alone but not lonely, she felt something crystallize into gratitude. She was grateful for the last straw that had finally broken. She was grateful for the humiliation that had woken her up. She was grateful for the 87 missed calls that had shown her just how far she'd come. She was grateful for the boundaries she'd set and kept and defended. Most of all, she was grateful for the choice that had been waiting for her all along, hiding behind years of guilt and obligation and the belief that loving someone meant dissolving yourself into them. She was grateful for the permission she'd finally given herself to exist. The ripple effect. 3 months later. By January of the following year, Sarah had become someone people sought out for advice. It started with Jennifer mentioning to mutual friends that Sarah had figured out something about family. And suddenly Sarah was receiving careful, tentative phone calls from acquaintances she barely knew. Women mostly, though one man called too. People who were drowning, people who were suffocating, people who were watching their own lives get absorbed into the gravitational pull of other people's crises. How did you do it? They asked. How did you just stop? Sarah tried to explain that it wasn't as simple as stopping, that it was a choice repeated 1,000 times, that the first time she let her mother's call go to voicemail, she felt like a criminal, that the first month was the hardest, and then gradually, imperceptibly, something shifted, that there was no magic moment where it became easy. It just became possible. But didn't you feel guilty? A woman named Rachel asked during one of these conversations. Rachel's mother lived with her, and Rachel was paying for everything. The mortgage, the food, the medications, while her mother sat on the couch and criticized her life choices. Every single day for the first month, Sarah admitted. Guilt was like this background radiation. I felt it when I woke up. I felt it at work. I felt it when I saw my bank balance going to my savings instead of disappearing into the void. So how did you get past it? I didn't get past it, Sarah said. I looked at it. I asked myself what the guilt was protecting me from, and the answer was connection. The guilt was the glue that held me to my family. If I let the guilt go, I had to accept that my family might let me go too, that they might choose anger over reconciliation, that they might not fight for the relationship, that I might end up alone. Rachel was quiet on the other end of the line. And did you, she asked quietly, end up alone? No, but I did end up lonely for a while. There's a difference. Loneliness is temporary. It's about not having people around you. Being alone is different. It's about not having to perform for anyone, not having to apologize for taking up space. I prefer alone to the feeling of being surrounded by people who don't actually see me. By the end of that phone call, Rachel had promised to stop paying for her mother's monthly medication refills and to tell her mother that if she couldn't afford them, they'd need to discuss cutting back to the generic versions. It was a small boundary, a tiny pebble dropped into water, but Sarah could feel the ripples it would send out. The letter from Michael. In February, Sarah received an actual handwritten letter from her brother. She almost didn't open it. After a year of silence from 2/3 of her family, letters still carried a weight of dread. But when she recognized Michael's looping handwriting, she realized something had shifted. She was no longer afraid of what her family might say to her. She was just curious. Sarah.
I've been thinking about writing this for a long time, and I finally got the guts to do it. I wanted to tell you that you were right. Not about everything. I still think you could have handled the initial conversation differently, could have warned us more clearly before pulling the plug. But you were right about the big thing. When you stopped paying for my tuition, I was furious. I felt abandoned. I felt like you'd punished me for something that wasn't my fault. For 6 months, I genuinely hated you. I'd rehearse conversations in my head where I told you off, where I made you understand what you'd done to me. But then something happened. I had to figure out my own shit. I got the second job, then the third. I found community college scholarship programs I didn't know existed. I connected with other students who were working their way through school. And suddenly, I wasn't unique in my struggle. I was just normal. I was just doing what people have been doing forever. And I realized something. You didn't hurt me. You freed me. You took away the option to be carried, which meant I finally had to carry myself. And it turns out I can. It turns out I'm stronger than I thought I was. Mom still won't talk about what happened. She's made comments about how you broke the family, how you were always selfish, how you abandoned us in our time of need. But Dad told me something. He said that when he stopped expecting you to fix everything, he finally had to figure out how to fix things himself. He's been working part-time at a hardware store, and he actually seems better, less angry, like he's not waiting around for his life to happen to him anymore. I don't know if this makes sense to you. I don't know if you want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that what you did, as much as it sucked at the time, ended up being one of the best things that happened to me. And I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the anger. I'm sorry for the guilt trips. I'm sorry for not seeing at the time that you were drowning and trying to save yourself. I see it now. If you want to get coffee sometime, I'd like that. No pressure, no expectations. Just two siblings who are figuring out their own lives. Michael. Sarah read the letter 3 times, and when she finished the third time, she was crying. Not from sadness, but from something like recognition. This was what she'd been hoping for. Not from her mother, but from someone. This was someone saying, I see what you did. I understand it now. I respect it. She called Michael that day. They got coffee on a Saturday, and it was awkward at first. They'd been out of touch for a year, and there was a canyon of unsaid things between them. But gradually, as they talked, the canyon narrowed. Michael told her about the girl he was seeing, about his plans to transfer to a 4-year university next year, about the strange feeling of being responsible for his own life. Mom's been talking about going back to work, Michael told her near the end of their coffee date. Not because she wants to, but because Dad says the house payment isn't sustainable with just his income. I don't know if she'll actually do it, but the fact that she's considering it instead of just waiting for you to come back and fix everything, that's something. Sarah nodded, but she didn't feel triumphant about this. She didn't feel like she'd won. Instead, she felt something quieter. She felt like her family was finally living in reality, instead of waiting for someone to rescue them from it. Do you think she'll ever forgive me? Sarah asked. Michael took a long time answering. Maybe, he said finally. But only if forgiveness doesn't mean you go back to paying the bills. Only if forgiveness means she accepts what happened and understands why you did it. And I don't know if Mom's capable of that. I know, Sarah said. I'm not holding my breath.
The one who stayed. In March, Sarah's phone rang while she was at work. It was her father. She almost didn't answer, muscle memory telling her that calls during work hours meant crisis, but something made her pick up. Hi, Dad, she said. Sarah. His voice sounded different than she remembered. Steadier. I know this is probably a surprise. I wanted to tell you something before your mother hears about it and tells it differently. Sarah's stomach tightened slightly. What happened? Nothing bad, at least not to us. But I'm starting a business, small thing, consulting with small businesses about supply chain management, using the experience from my old job. Your brother's helping me set it up. We're gonna launch it in April. Sarah felt something in her chest loosen. This was growth. This was her father doing something instead of waiting for someone else to do it for him. Dad, that's amazing. Congratulations. There's more, Robert said. I wanted to tell you that I know what I did. Not just to you, but to myself. I checked out. When I lost that first job, something in me just gave up. And instead of fighting to get back up, I let your mother and then you carry me. I let myself become someone I didn't respect. Sarah didn't interrupt. She waited. Your mother thinks you were wrong to stop pain. She's never going to change her mind about that. But I want you to know that I think you were right. I think you were brave. And I think what you did saved me, even though it hurt like hell at the time. Dad, Sarah started, but she didn't know what she was going to say. Let me finish, he said gently. I'm not calling to apologize on your mother's behalf or to reconcile for the whole family or any of that. I'm calling because you're my daughter and you're a person separate from the money or the family dysfunction or any of that. And I'm proud of you. I wanted you to hear that from me. Sarah was crying again. Not the same kind of crying as when she'd read Michael's letter. This was different. This was the sound of something so rarely heard. A parent acknowledging their child's autonomy, their right to say no, their value as a human being, separate from what they could provide. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Thank you for saying that. You're welcome, Robert said. And Sarah, I hope you'll come to the business launch in April. Michael will be there. I'd like you to be there too. I'll be there, Sarah promised. After she hung up, she sat at her desk for a long time and just breathed. She didn't go back to her reports immediately. She let herself sit in the feeling of being seen by her father, of having made a choice that had rippled out and changed something real, something fundamental in his life.
She thought about her mother, who she still hadn't heard from. She thought about the choice Patricia had made, to dig in, to insist she was right, to wait for Sarah to break down and come crawling back. That was a choice too. That was Patricia choosing anger over understanding, choosing to be right over being connected. And Sarah finally really understood that she couldn't fix that it wasn't her responsibility to fix that some people would never understand what you were trying to do, and that was okay. You could love them and still let them go. You could be sad about what they refused to become and still be okay with your own life. The launch event was in a small space downtown, and Sarah almost didn't recognize her father. He was wearing a suit that fit him properly, and he was smiling. Not the tight, performative smile of someone trying to make it through an event, but a real smile, the kind that came from inside. Michael was there with his girlfriend, a kind-looking woman named Sophie, who worked as a veterinary technician. She held Michael's hand while he introduced her to their father, and Sarah realized with a start that this was the first time she was meeting anyone her brother considered important enough to bring to family events. Several of Robert's old colleagues came, people who'd worked with him at the manufacturing plant before it closed. They seemed genuinely excited about his new venture, and Sarah realized that her father had been more respected in his industry than his depression had let him believe. By the end of the event, the business had secured 3 consulting contracts. "This is because of you," Robert told Sarah at the end of the evening, pulling her aside. "I would never have started this if you hadn't pushed me to figure it out myself. You did this. I just stopped enabling you not to." Robert nodded like he understood the distinction. "I know, but I wanted to say it anyway." He pulled her into a hug, and Sarah let herself relax into it. This wasn't the hug of dependency or obligation. This was the hug of 2 people who had both survived something difficult and come out the other side still loving each other. By October, exactly 2 years after that first message that had started everything, Sarah found herself in a reflective mood. She was sitting on her balcony, wine glass in hand, looking out at the city lights, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Sarah. This is Mom. I'm writing because I need to say something, and I'm using text because I know you won't answer a call from me. I've been thinking about what happened for 2 years now. I've had a lot of time to think about it. And I wanted to tell you that I'm not ready to apologize, but I wanted to tell you that I understand now that you did what you had to do, and that I'm sorry for the way I responded. I'm sorry for the manipulation and the guilt trips and the letter. That was cruel, and I know it was cruel when I was doing it. I was just so angry and scared. But that's not your fault. That's mine.
I hope someday you can find it in yourself to have a relationship with me again. But I understand if you can't. I wanted you to know that I understand now, Mom. Sarah read the message 5 times. She didn't respond immediately. She sat with it like she'd learned to sit with difficult feelings, not pushing them away, not diving into them, just observing them. This wasn't everything. This wasn't the full reconciliation, the complete understanding, the return to connection. But it was something. It was recognition. It was her mother finally saying, I see what you did. I didn't like it, but I see it. Sarah sat with that understanding for an hour. Then she typed back, Thank you for writing this. I'm not ready either, not for everything. But I appreciate you saying it. Maybe we can have coffee sometime. No expectations, just to see if there's anything to rebuild. Sarah. She hit send and then waited. The response came an hour later. I would like that. Thank you. The coffee shop. They met 2 weeks later on a Saturday morning at a neutral coffee shop, somewhere that belonged to neither of them, that had no history for them to carry into it. Patricia looked older than Sarah remembered. Not just physically, though there was more gray in her hair, more lines around her eyes, but in the way she held herself, like someone had turned down the volume on her, made her smaller. Or perhaps, Sarah thought, her mother had finally realized how much energy it took to stay angry, and she'd simply been worn down by it. They ordered coffee and sat at a small table by the window, and there was awkwardness at first, the kind of silence that wanted to be filled. I've been in therapy, Patricia said finally, for about 6 months. My father suggested it, and I was too angry to listen, but then Michael said the same thing, and I realized that maybe they were onto something. Sarah sipped her coffee and waited. My therapist helped me see something. She asked me why I was so angry with you, and I said it was because you abandoned us, betrayed us, didn't care about family. And she asked me if those things were true, or if I was just hurt and scared. And I realized that you didn't abandon us. You set a boundary, and I experienced that boundary as abandonment because I'd never really understood that you were a separate person from me, that you had your own life and your own needs. Patricia looked down at her coffee. I don't expect this to fix everything. I don't expect you to forgive me or to want to spend holidays with me or any of that. But I wanted to tell you that I understand now. You weren't selfish. You were brave. And I was too much of a coward to see it when it was happening. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, and not reconciliation, but something like acceptance. Acceptance that her mother had done her best with the tools she had, and her best had not been enough, but it had been what she could manage. And now, finally, she was managing something different. I'm still angry sometimes, and I'm still sad about what we had and what we didn't have. But I'm not angry at you anymore. I'm just sad. Does that make sense? Yes, that makes sense. They sat in silence for a while, drinking their coffee, watching people move through the world outside the window. Eventually, Patricia asked about Sarah's job, and Sarah asked about her mother's therapy. And they had the kind of conversation that people who are learning to become strangers who happen to be related have. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning.
The Thanksgiving after. 2 years and 4 months after that first breaking email, Sarah sat around a dinner table with her family for Thanksgiving. It was at a restaurant, neutral ground, chosen specifically to avoid anyone having to pretend their home was comfortable for the others. It was a compromise, which felt appropriate. Her family was built on compromises now, on the understanding that reconciliation meant respecting boundaries, which meant accepting limitations. Robert was there, and he brought his business partner, who was becoming a friend. Michael was there with Sophie, and they'd announced they were getting engaged,
which had prompted genuine congratulations all around. Even Patricia seemed happy about it, which Sarah recognized as her mother making an effort to be the kind of person her son wanted to bring his life to. And Sarah was there, not as the financial solver of family problems, but as a person, as a woman with her own life, her own job, her own apartment that she decorated with her own money, as someone who'd learned to say no and to survive the aftermath of saying no. "I want to propose a toast," Robert said as they waited for dessert. "I want to thank all of you for showing up tonight. And more than that, for understanding that showing up looks different than it used to. For understanding that we're rebuilding this family on new terms. And I want to specifically thank Sarah for having the courage to set a boundary that we all needed her to set, even though none of us understood it at the time." Patricia didn't nod along enthusiastically, but she didn't look away either. She looked at her coffee, which was her way of acknowledging something she wasn't quite ready to celebrate, but was willing to accept. "I also want to say that I'm proud of all of you. I'm proud of Michael for putting himself through school. I'm proud of Sarah for taking care of herself. I'm proud of Patricia for showing up here and doing the work to understand what happened. And I'm proud of myself for finally figuring out that my life was something I had to build instead of something someone else had to build for me." They raised their glasses, and Sarah felt something complete in her chest. This wasn't the family she'd wanted. It wasn't the family of unconditional love and easy reconciliation that she'd dreamed about, but it was a family built on truth, on respect, on the understanding that everyone in it had rights and needs and boundaries. It was, she realized, the only kind of family that would last. Epilogue. 3 years later, Sarah was promoted to senior analyst at her firm, a position that came with a significant raise and her own office. She still decorated it with plants and pictures, but not of her family. The pictures on her desk were of her and Jennifer at a concert, of her alone at the Grand Canyon, of Michael and Sophie's wedding where she'd been a bridesmaid. Pictures of her life, lived on her own terms. Her father's consulting business had grown into a real company, with 3 part-time employees and a steady stream of clients. Patricia had taken a job in the office, working part-time doing administrative work. It wasn't glamorous or lucrative, but it was something. It was her doing something instead of waiting for someone else to do it.
Michael was in his final year of university, working on a degree in environmental science. He and Sophie were planning a small wedding for the following spring, and they'd asked Sarah to help plan it, not as a financial bailout, but as a collaborator. Sarah still didn't have a close relationship with her mother, but she had a cordial one. They saw each other every few months for coffee or lunch. They called on holidays. It was limited and careful, but it was something built on reality rather than obligation. One evening, Sarah received a text from her mother. "I saw a quote today that made me think of you. Setting a boundary is not the same as building a wall. I'm finally understanding the difference." Sarah thought about that text for a long time. She thought about the boundaries she'd set and how they'd allowed her to live. She thought about how her entire family had to learn to live in a new way after she stopped carrying them. She thought about how sometimes love meant letting people fall so they could learn to catch themselves. She thought about how sometimes the most generous thing you could do was to refuse to rescue someone. And she thought about how 3 years ago, she'd been suffocating, drowning, disappearing into other people's needs, and how now she was simply alive. Alive in her apartment that was hers, alive in her job that she'd earned, alive in a family that had learned, imperfectly and slowly and painfully, that love didn't require self-destruction. That evening, Sarah poured herself a glass of wine, sat on her balcony, and looked out at the city lights. She felt the weight of her own life, the real weight, not the crushing weight of other people's crises, but the solid, manageable weight of her own existence. She felt grateful. She felt free. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally exactly where she was supposed to be.